Speaker. Our next presentation today is Bootstrapping Economic Development Through Reuse of Historic Structures with Hugh French. You can read Hugh's bio in your program. Hugh has unparalleled working knowledge of this topic, and we are very fortunate that he is willing to share it with all of us. Hugh, please take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. Let me see if I can get this shared screen going. Yes, I think we're good. So I'm going to keep this to 15 minutes or less. I want to just sort of give a quick overview of what we're doing here in Eastport. We started 18 years ago. And one of the biggest things that you have to realize with what we're doing is that, like a good part of rural Maine, but particularly a place like Eastport, there's been severe population decline over the last century. So Eastport's population right now is about 1,200. It's lost 80% of its population. And so the trick has been, how do you keep buildings, vertical, particularly key buildings, when the population cannot really support those buildings anymore. And for us, it was trying to come up with a sort of a game plan early on. And one of the things we decided is that we couldn't be just doing one thing. We had to do many things. So not only historic preservation, but also history and also architecture. Our proximity to Canada meant we had to play the Canada card, as well as art, as well as community development. So this is kind of a contemporary bird's eye view that we had commissioned that shows 7 of our current 8 buildings. We have a 9th one that's been pledged. These are all part of the sort of core area of Eastport. I'm going to go through these very quickly to show how we've been able to keep these buildings alive, begin restoration on all of them, and trying to repurpose them. Because I said they're not coming back as what they were. They're not going to be entirely supported by the community as it is today. And the other thing you have to keep in mind with our activities is we're basically the only option often. In larger places, you may have somebody else who might be willing to take a building on. In our case, we either take it on or it's gone. And so we have to make decisions very quickly. We have to be very focused about what realistically or even unrealistically we may be able to tackle. Sometimes it's just a question of buying time and see if we can come up with a solution for a particular building. So of the 8 buildings that we have now, 7 of them would otherwise have been torn down if we hadn't taken them on. 5 of the buildings were gifted to us. We purchased 3 buildings so far. And when we started, we said, realistically, it's going to take us 25 years to get to first base. We're 18 years in, and the next 5 years are really critical in terms of getting us to that first base. So I'll go quickly through several of the buildings, try to keep this as short as I can. This is a map that we commissioned. It shows a fire of the waterfront area. Like many places, 19th century fires devastated core parts of communities. In Eastport, it was 1886, leveled the entire downtown and waterfront. Most of the downtown was built the following year. In 1887, many of the buildings were designed by the same architect, Henry Black of St. John and Boston, Massachusetts. Here's our main building as it looks today. This was, again, 1887, would have been torn down. We put about 1.2 million into the building. This is what it looked like when we first got it. And enormous amount of work, had to completely take down and rebuild the north wall, big sections of other walls. What was peculiar was we actually found the original masonry window forms in the attic. And so as part of the rebuilding of those masonry walls, we were able to reuse those 1887 forms. As part of this restoration, The city of Eastport also put a civic space in front with a water fountain that was originally there in 1889. That water fountain was gifted to us 5 years ago, and we maintain it. Second building, 2011, on the right, terrible shape. This is an interior view. We had to totally rebuild the interior. There wasn't one stick of wood that we could salvage. Basically, it was 2 buildings, restoring the exterior masonry walls and then rebuilding a wood building inside. And we've reused that. We started an artist residency program, bringing in artists from across the country in 2013. This is our 8th year. We also transformed it as kind of a downtown energy efficiency project. So it has super insulated radiant heat and an Austrian wood pellet boiler. This is what it looks like today. We've got another 250,000 to put into the building. We were gifted these 2 houses in 2014, 2015. We use these for artist residencies, housing. This is one of the buildings that started off life as a vestry, now, then later as a Civil War Veterans Hall. And these are murals that were uncovered that date to just after the Civil War GAR murals that we're hoping to restore. One of many things that we have to do is not just restoring buildings. We have to build cultural collections because this area got stripped, particularly Eastport. People left, things left, and so I'll go quickly through a couple of things that we've got about 12,000 artifacts now that we've assembled over the last 18 years. This is, for instance, a broadside 1870 English Passamaquoddy temperance broadside. This is a silver vase that we discovered in New York, 1852, by a Boston silversmith with ties to the area. We found a companion piece in 5 years later in Boston. This is a table we found brought back from New Jersey. This is part of a pottery excavation or a privy pit, about 200 pieces that we uncovered. This is a collection of photographs of the area of the fisheries, 1938. We also do a New Year's Eve event that we started 15 years ago, lowering a sardine and a maple leaf from the top of a building. There was nothing going on in Eastport on New Year's Eve, and now it's become a real success, often attracting national attention. This is a book, cover of a book that we did 9 years in the making on architecture, about 200 photographs, 216 pages, working with 2 Canadians, a photographer and an architect. Streetscape drawing that we did in 2011. We secured $300,000 for the City of Eastport CDBG funding that we put into restoration of 12 storefronts in the downtown. These are 2 church buildings that we took on in 2015, 2016. This one is the North Church, dates to 1819. This is what it looked like after we removed the drop ceiling. We restored that. This is what it now looks like. We've been able to use it for large-scale art installations. It has incredible acoustics, and so we've been able to do some music performances as well. This is 1828, our Congregational Church building. This is what the interior looks like now. This is the one building we don't have a game plan for, and we've got to figure it out pretty quickly. This is what it looked like just before the balcony was enclosed. This photograph dates to about 1880. This is one of our really special and smallest buildings, dates to about 1890, sort of a Victorian child's playhouse that we were gifted in 2017. This is it being moved to our one of our properties. So this is the front of our main building, Bank Square, and the building on the right is our most recent building, which is the Masonic building, again, 1887, designed by Henry Black. This is what it looked like shortly after it was built. Its main problem was it had a collapsing structural beam between the first and second floor in the front of the building. And so we had to move very quickly last year to acquire it. We put a new steel beam to replace that rotted collapsing beam. And now we're working on, this is again sort of the shoring work for that replacement beam. This is what the building looked like late last year. And this is the rebuilding of the ground level storefront that should be completed in another month. We've raised about $1 million towards this building. We've got another $1.5 million to go. And this is the first building that we've actually purchased and taken on where we actually had some commitments up front as opposed to scrambling like crazy and pulling our hair out, wondering how we're going to make the next payment the next year. So that in kind of a real nutshell is what we've sort of pulled together over the last 18 years. And the next 5 years are really critical in terms of consolidating what we've gained, restoring the remaining parts of these buildings, and really sort of upping the ante in terms of programming that we have going on for all of these buildings. You know, as I said, it's been a gamble since we began. We're still very much in a gambling phase, and that's where we are. But you know, it's really a case of you either act or something's gone. So I'm happy to take any questions after this. And again, this is just a really brief sort of overview of how you can pull together some resources, how you can protect some buildings in a place that has witnessed really severe decline.
So attendees, you have a question and answer panel, a Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. It's usually at the bottom. If you click on that, it'll open up and you can post questions to this speaker as well as to the other speakers that we have today. And a moderator, myself or someone else, will convey your questions onward to the speaker. And our first question has come in, Hugh. So Bryce Waldrop asks, how were these projects funded?
That's a good question. Again, the trick we realized very early on was unless we were able to bring in funds from outside, we didn't have a prayer in hell. And a lot of our strategy has been to how do you attract funding from elsewhere? And a lot of that is based on ideas. People will invest in ideas where they may not necessarily invest in a small, tiny community on the eastern coast of Maine. And so, for instance, we received 2 awards from the National Art Place initiative based in New York City. We're the only place in Maine that's ever received funding from them. And there's a reason for that. And that's because we work differently. We're not, as I said, we're not just historic preservation. We really weave together a lot of different things to make things work. And that's what attracted the attention from Art Place.
Great. Next question is, can you speak a little bit about your vision for how the Tides Institute and Museum of Art will hopefully drive increased tourism and residency in the Down East area?
I think, again, it's, you know, we believe that it has to be kind of a multi-faceted approach, that there's no one quick solution. And so that's why we have our hands in a lot of different things, whether it be, you know, revitalizing the downtown or whatever. You know, we certainly see, you know, anything that can make Eastport a more attractive place to people, you know, whether, again, it's a whole range of things. You have to have the amenities that people are looking for. You have to have the housing stock. You have to have decent schools. You have to have medical facilities and so forth. And so we do work with a lot of people in those areas from time to time on special projects and so forth. But in terms of, you know, tourism, again, one of the hopes is to begin to programmatically market our buildings as a unit, so that you may see people come here just to tour the buildings. We don't want to be an historic series of houses. We want to see contemporary activities going on in these buildings.
Great, and I've got a couple more questions on this track. What has been the role of the Eastport business community in the work? And what about the city's comprehensive plan?
You know, I think in terms of the city's historic comprehensive plan, I mean, certainly the historic element, core element in Eastport is featured well. The city doesn't have funds per se to take on historic buildings, that's where we have to step in. In terms of the business community, I think, they're supportive of what we're trying to do. As I said, we did a downtown facade program, working with 12 different property owners in the downtown. So I think they sort of get it. Again, the trick is, how do you justify investment in some of these buildings? And so in terms of the buildings that we have taken on, the 3 buildings, these are buildings that no one else would touch. A commercial entity really could not justify putting in the kind of monies that we put into these buildings because they'd never get their money back. And that's that's one of the real struggles with downtown Eastport is, they're great buildings, they're great historic buildings, but if you put in substantial amounts of money, the value of those buildings is not going to go up to meet what you've invested.
Right. It's tough. I don't know, and tracking on the same vein, are there efforts happening by the community or private businesses in the community to attract more people to move to Eastport and invest in the building stock there?
I think yes, there is. I think it's difficult. Eastport is just the sheer locale makes it difficult. It's another 100+ miles beyond Bangor. That's been a struggle. And I think it's putting enough pieces together to make the community attractive enough. Again, it's not just historic structures, it's also, healthcare facilities, schools, city government, and so forth. I think we're getting closer, but we still have a good ways to go. Great.
And Liz asked, what's the story of the Victorian Playhouse? I have to admit,
that is actually a really interesting story. That, again, was gifted to us 3 years ago. And it was built around 1890 as part of the then mayor of Eastport's large historic home in the center of the town here for his daughter, Dorothy. Then probably in the 1940s, it was actually bought by the person who had originally built it in the 1890s. And so it has actually been, until 2017, it had actually been on the grounds of the builder of the building in the outskirts of town. And then has come back to one of our properties in the center of town, and we're still trying to figure out exactly where it will end up. We're hoping that we can at least occasionally have it used again as a kind of a children's playhouse, but we still have to complete the restoration, and we still have to figure out exactly where it's going to be sited.